This is Climate Watch. I'm Zhao Ying. Welcome to the show. The European Commission has proposed a new action plan to address rising energy costs. The Accelerate EU initiative is designed to provide immediate support to households and businesses facing higher fuel prices, while also fast-tracking the transition to cleaner, domestically produced energy. This follows a package of measures announced in March to accelerate clean energy investment, lower energy bills for citizens, and new initiatives in areas like small modular reactors. At the same time, China is accelerating its push to build what it calls a new energy system. Under its 15th five-year plan, clean energy, electrification, and industrial transformation are becoming key drivers of economic growth. So, with two of the world's biggest climate actors moving faster in the clean energy transition, does this moment bring them closer or push them further into competition? Today, we bring together voices from both sides to explore what's really at stake. Arvea Marieni is a senior advisor to the World Green Design Organization and European Climate Pact ambassador. Zhang Jian is the Vice Dean of the Institute of Climate Change and Sustainable Development at Tsinghua University. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you.
Arvea, let me go to you first. We know the European Commission recently unveiled a package of measures to accelerate clean energy investment and strengthen Europe's energy system. Can you help us understand why clean energy is becoming such a central priority for Europe right now?
Well, the first and foremost reason for the acceleration of the electrification and the phasing out of fossil is obviously a matter of energy security and independence. Already the war in Ukraine had accelerated this process. We were facing extremely high energy prices due to our dependence collectively from mostly gas imported at the time from Russia. To a large extent, we have gone through different phases. We are operating more on LNG, so liquefied gas, which means obviously the buildup of infrastructure. That is also a potential lock-in for the future. And today, we're all seeing the unfortunate, very dramatic events unfolding with the attack, the US-Israeli attack on Iran, and the consequences of the block of the closure of the Hormuz Straits and what it means for the world economy. Therefore, on March 2026, as one of the measures, but there will be more structured measures, the European Commission has presented a package to boost access to affordable and clean energy while strengthening Europe's energy systems. A central element of this clean energy investment strategy, obviously, is also the investment that needs to increase from around, according to numbers of the European Commission, from around 240 billion in the past decade a year to around 660 billion per year between 2026 and 2030, and close to 700 billion in the following decade. And this shift is huge, but it's already being accelerated also at national level. I will close by saying that on April 10, 2026, for instance, France, the government of France, which is one of the most, let's say, focused on strategic autonomy for the country and for the European Union, announced a major electrification plan to accelerate measures that were already foreseen, aimed at reducing dependence on imported fuels. The plan includes doubling financial support for electrification to 10 billion per year by 2030 at national level, the banning on new gas boilers in new buildings from the end of this year, 2026. Similar measures have been contemplated by different states in the last years, There has been recently pushback from lobbyists, from certain groups. This has happened, for instance, with the change of government in Germany. My understanding and my anticipation is that the crisis that we're facing with the energy markets globally will again accelerate this process. And France also has in place a system for social leasing for electric vehicles to help and support families, especially low-income families, to access mobility, the shift to electricity-driven mobility.
And in fact, those are the same sectors and the same kind of measures that are being presented on the 22nd of April by the European Commission under the name of Accelerate EU, which is a plan containing structural measures to lower the dependence on fossil fuels and that go in the same direction as the French measures.
Yes, so as you said, investment is obviously a key element of this package. And also, I noticed it also mentions de-risking clean energy projects to attract investors. What kind of risks are we talking about here? And is financing currently one of the biggest bottlenecks for the clean energy transition?
Of course, it is. It is one of the main bottlenecks, not only for the European Union, but also globally. I mean, Professor Zhang knows better than many how important is sustainable finance at global level. And the Commission strategy makes clear, exactly as countries are saying in the process, some countries are saying in the process of the negotiation at the UNFCCC level, that public funding alone will not be sufficient within the European Union. So the Commission, the Union, is applying the same rules to interpreting what happens globally with the shared responsibilities among the countries as well as internally. Why is that? Because we need to accelerate also private capital within the European Union itself. Europe has a large pool of capital, but structural barriers continue to limit deployment. Those barriers are, for instance, fragmented member states, national markets, complex permitting procedures, taking up an investment, realizing an investment and capacity building is like building on infrastructure, takes sometimes very many years. And risk profiles discourage private investors. So public institutions such as the European Investment Bank are expected to play a catalytic role by reducing risk and attracting and favoring this private finance. But of course, it will take a huge effort. And then there is the risk, which is geopolitical risk. Nowadays, we are under very constrained circumstance. We know that we need to get rid of fossils, but we can not, and we are wary to make sure that we're not going to create an economy which is dependent on outside players. And nowadays, although China has this huge and important and positive role for accelerating the transition thanks to manufacturing, we also are seeing that this is challenging this superiority of manufacturing capability. This is challenging the very structural existence of our own industrial sectors. And this is creating a huge pressure that we need to find a way to solve together with our international partners. We design the rules of the trade with China itself in order to find harmonious ways forward for everyone to be able to operate. And of course, within these risks, some are considering also security risks, such as I'm thinking of solar photovoltaic, for instance, inverters with the connected and cybersecurity potential risks in this infrastructure may push, and is already happening to an extent, some countries to limit the imports from China. All those are issues. There are many solutions, but we need to look at the things and the files with clear eyes, each file, and work together on solutions.
Well, Professor Zhang, let me ask you this, because China's 15th five-year plan calls for the development of a new energy system that is clean, low carbon, safe, and efficient by 2030. It also sets a target of cutting carbon emissions intensity by 17% by 2030. That's slightly lower than the 18% goal in the previous plan, but it's still quite ambitious. So, can you unpack what this target really means and what kind of energy transition China is likely to see over this period?
Well, thank you. So, even though the carbon intensity reduction target for the 15th five-year plan is 1 percentage point lower than the previous one, it's actually still ambitious and I think honestly even harder to achieve. Why? Because we can't just look at the numbers on the surface. You have to consider the starting point and what stage of the transition we are in. First, China's economy keeps growing steadily. That means the same percentage drop in carbon intensity now equals a much bigger absolute reduction in emissions. In other words, the bigger the economy gets, the more decarbonization work you have to do. Second, if you look closely at the targets themselves, the 18% cut in the 14th five-year plan was based on 2020 levels, but the 17th target is based on 2025 levels. So we are starting from a much cleaner baseline, which means we need even stronger efforts and deeper structural changes to hit that target. From an industrial point of view, it signals a major shift from just controlling total energy use to controlling both the total amount and the intensity of carbon emissions. That's going to speed up the transformation of high energy consumption and high emissions industries and push them to upgrade. So if you look at this through the lens of energy security, this is really a push to get us transitioning away from fossil fuels faster and build an energy system that relies more on clean and non-fossil sources. This target shows China's serious commitment to fighting climate change. With the global green trade rules coming into play, like the EU's CBAM, cutting carbon intensity is no longer just an environmental thing. It is becoming a must-do if Chinese industries want to stay competitive internationally.
Yes, and also I think as in many countries, China has also seen this decoupling between emissions reduction and economic development. And recent analysis shows that clean energy contributed more than a third of China's GDP growth in 2025. So does this mark a fundamental shift, like from climate policy being a cause or a burden to becoming a key engine of economic growth?
Well, I think in a way, we can say it's incremental rather than fundamental. The headline finding is absolutely remarkable. As you mentioned, clean energy drove more than a third of China's GDP growth in 2025, and that accounted for over 90% of the rise in investment across the entire economy. So without the clean energy sector, China's GDP would be much lower than the official 5% target. And the growth is accelerating rather than slowing. So the overall economy grew at about 5%. Our clean energy sectors actually expanded at 18% in 2025. So the number is 12% in 2024. So the new threes, EVs, batteries, and solar continue to dominate, right? Generating about two-thirds of the sector's value and attracting more than half of its investment. But I wouldn't overstate this as a complete transition overnight. In China, fossil fuel investment remains sizable, and the approach here has been described as build before break, right? So expanding clean energy massively before phasing out fossil capacity. So this is a gradual process. For decades, climate action was framed as a trade-off, right? As environmental benefits. So we have environmental benefits at the cost of economic growth. So this framing no longer holds for China. So this is why I think it's fundamental in this way. So China has moved from seeing the energy transition as an environmental obligation to viewing it as a better way to develop. So when we shift to cleaner energy, we also get big co-benefits. For example, cleaner air and lower public health expenses. The transition is still unfolding, so it's becoming more and more connected to broader economic trends, like the rapid rise of AI. So these trends can both help, but also, in a way, challenge the clean energy sector. So whether clean energy growth can be sustained depends on a bunch of things. For example, avoiding overcapacity, keeping innovation going, and adapting to the global trade environment.
Yes, and Arvea, we know that Europe's strategy focuses heavily on energy affordability and addressing energy poverty. But if you look at China's experience, do you think Europe should also frame its climate policy more as an industrial growth strategy and less a regulatory burden in order to get the same kind of economic momentum?
Well, what we have seen from happening in China broadly, starting from 2008, 9, 2010 was a sort of a turning point for the acceleration of this new high quality development that Zhang Jian was mentioning, and that are becoming pillars of a development of the country, and this fundamental shift. And I agree with him, it is a fundamental shift because it is basically embedding these principles in the real economy, in every policy and economic sectors as an aligned KPI. And the Chinese system is trying to find a way to harmonize all these goals and create a system that is stable over the long term. And this idea of building before destroying is also fundamentally a question of realism. China is highly independent in terms of energy. I think the Chinese system reaches around 80% of independence. This is one of the reasons that, for instance, the current Iran crisis is affecting China to a relatively limited extent. This is because of the higher electrification rate. This is also because of coal. I mean, we have to say it. The fact that China has its own nationally accessible source of energy is a matter of energy security. Therefore, if there are conflictual situations internationally, every state, every nation will try to revert to what they can control. So conflicts globally will affect climate policy, not only for the gigatons of emissions caused by the war, but also because of this necessity for the states to try and hold their economy together. But yes, industrial policy is coming back as an important element of development. This is a wake-up call in Europe. This is a wake-up call for regional policy in the European Union. I myself look at the developments of clusters and regional models with decisive top-down allocation, for instance, of competence centers and direction of investments, decisions from the central government of where to have certain important technologies first piloted out and then structured as a complete supply chain. I'm thinking of Shenzhen as a beacon of the electric mobility, starting with a direction that was public procurement. The government decided that public procurement was going to create way towards the replacement of internal combustion driven transportation means with new energy vehicles. And that was a political decision that we didn't make in the European Union. This is the same case for solar photovoltaic. We now have to do that, and we have to do it in a way that brings together competition and cooperation. And we have to find these models that allow for our economies to thrive with this new model, balancing and offsetting also the risk for labor forces Zhang Jian was talking about artificial intelligence and its implications for energy consumption, but I would say environmental constraints. Water is another huge issue when you're planning these hyperscalers. We have to find rules together.
Yes, and Professor Zhang, just now Arvea mentioned energy independence, and we often hear terms like de-risking in Brussels and self-reliance in Beijing. So do these ideas point toward decoupling in the climate and energy space, or you believe there's still room for meaningful cooperation?
I think there's actually a lot of room for meaningful cooperation. First, let's look at what these terms really mean, right? When EU leaders first talked about de-risking, I think it's made very clear this isn't about decoupling. In fact, de-risking is about keeping economic ties while managing risks in terms of trade and economic relations. And on China's side, self-reliance doesn't mean closing the door. It's about building up domestic capabilities. China has consistently said it's committed to an open world economy and a stable global trading system. Now, when it comes to climate and energy specifically, cooperation isn't just possible, it's absolutely essential if we want to tackle the growing climate crisis. According to a recent UN report, the past 11 years have been the hottest on record. That's going to have long-lasting impacts worldwide. For example, more frequent extreme weather events, greater risks to food and water, as already mentioned just now, and more pressure on our economic and social systems. So to pull that off, cooperation is a must, and that depends on open and connected supply chains and ongoing technology transfer and exchanges. More and more countries are, I think, realizing this. You can see it in the progress made at last year's COP meeting, right? So overall, these trends don't point to decoupling. They point to a more structured form of interdependence, where meaningful cooperation is still possible and actually necessary.
Yeah, actually, a huge part of China's growth came from the so-called new three, namely EVs, batteries, solar. So with the EU implementing such policy measures like the carbon border adjustment mechanism to kind of protect EU's own industries during this transition, do you think China's clean energy sector can continue to drive economic growth if the Western markets become harder to access?
Well, to give a quick answer, yes, I think it can. Let me explain why, probably from two perspectives. First, if we look at China's domestic side, the clean energy sector has strong internal demand, driven by the energy transition itself. So we are talking about large-scale renewable energy deployment, electrification, and grid expansion, and of course, energy storage. All of that will keep generating huge economic activity. So honestly, domestic demand alone gives clean energy a solid foundation to keep growing. And second, at the global level, yes, trade tensions are rising, but we can't forget that cooperation is still essential, right, to tackle the climate crisis, as I mentioned just now, which is getting more urgent by the day. Again, if we look at COP30 last year, for example, trade was a major focus, and they actually got some important things done. Countries agreed to strengthen dialogue on how climate measures and trade interact. They also set up a dedicated platform to talk about the opportunities, challenges, and barriers related to climate and trade policies. So that's a pretty big deal because it's the first time that issues about unilateral matters have been formally brought into the UNFCCC process. So now the current setup is still pretty limited and not legally binding, but it shows a growing recognition. I would say that we need an open, stable, and predictable international trade environment.
Okay, so Avia, do you think that tools like the carbon border adjustment mechanism is necessary to protect domestic industries, or do you feel this is also a kind of green protectionism?
I think that Professor Zhang Jian already said something. He said that CBAM has pushed stronger innovation and industrial improvement within the Chinese sectors that are affected as well. And basically, we may see a strengthening of the ETS, so the emission trading system, the carbon market, so China, also due to the presence of CBAM. At the same time, there are obviously consideration of, it's always a question of level playing field. Zhang Jian was talking about the relevance of trade measures. Today, nowadays, economic policy is climate policy at the end, because we need to rewrite the rules of the game based on the integration of these KPIs that were not considered in previous economic systems. Those KPIs define the rules that create the business models and the marginality and the profitability of companies. Therefore, if we have a higher price for a ton of CO2 under the European ETS, that turns into a cost that we have to somehow balance when we're talking and we're facing imports from outside. But I think it must not become an issue of conflict. It can become an issue of, for instance, finding mechanisms, not talking right now. I mean, the CBAM is creating revenues that ideally have to be reinvested in innovation to accelerate transition pathways within our own industries in Europe. We can think of financial models for supporting, for instance, lower income countries using the proceedings of carbon, let's say, taxes. Because at the end of the day, what we didn't do over 40 years was giving a price, a flat price to the emissions, equal for everybody. And that would have been the simplest solution. It is not possible. Every country has got their own, let's say, policy pathways. But we have to find economic mechanisms. So I'm not negative about CBAM, and I don't think our Chinese friends in the industry are scared about CBAM. Mm-hmm. They will probably beat some of our companies at the CBAM game. What I'm worried about, quite frankly, is, for instance, that some within the European Union are discussing today whether the ETS should still stand and should still remain strong, as if the problem for competitiveness and higher energy prices in the European Union would be dependent on the CBAM. This is not the case. Renewables are the lowest priced energy sources today, broadly, globally, certainly for the European Union. We are seeing this already in the competitivity of different countries. The ones that have got higher renewable or low carbon energy in the matrix are definitely able to support investment in their industrial basis. I'm thinking of Spain, I'm thinking about the Nordics. While the countries such as Italy that are very strongly dependent on gas, for instance, have consistently very much higher prices. So it is an economic advantage that we need to leverage. The question is how we design these rules in order to avoid conflicts to arise and to share the pie. I think there was some Chinese policymaker recently thinking in terms of competition that applies to the competition between Chinese provinces as well. You do not need to fight for the shares of the pie. You have to make the pie bigger and to use the benefits.
Yes, that's true. And actually, earlier this year, I think we discussed this earlier. We saw what some described as a soft landing in the EV tariff dispute between China and the EU. So do you think this could perhaps become a model going forward, the managed competition?
Managed competition, competitive cooperation, or cooperation with competition is fundamental. There is no way out. Zhang Jian was saying that not only for climate change and environment, for a lot of the global commons that can only be managed together, or we simply move towards a path of destruction of the structures of the international system as it is, which I believe nobody really can, in good minds, can wish for. Obviously, that is a way. One way is the attraction of investments in the European Union, managed. Some of the countries are doing it. But what I want to say is that we need to be careful, ring fencing some specific technology areas that are particularly risky because they affect the stability of infrastructure. Europe is very dependent, for instance, on digital, not from China at the moment, from the US. Therefore, this approach to sovereignty is bilateral. We have to start defining exactly, based on standards, technical understanding of the products, how to address specific risks and how to manage them. We also have to start thinking about how to design joint ventures that are able to protect each other's rights and the labor market. Deng Xiaoping, as we were mentioning during the last podcast, had created a system based on which joint ventures were possible in China with a Chinese majority. We are probably moving forward under the Industrial Act at the same model for European companies. We have to allow limited reciprocal mutual transfer of technology, also in the common interest of pushing and accelerating research and development. I also would like to imagine one thing. I was talking very recently with a large French company that has been established in China for almost 30 years. They're very innovative. They're operating business models for decarbonization of built infrastructure. And they were thinking, what if we start taking our Chinese partners to China, and at the same time, we start working in China even in the procurement, in the public procurement sector where foreign companies are not normally allowed, using our Chinese partners. That may create a model for shared advantages. I think the future is in that direction, also considering that a lot of the production will have to be relocalized just for managing carbon and resource footprint of production. We cannot produce as we were used in a sustainable economic model in very far away places. So a lot of the supply chains will be coming back and reshored.
Yes. Professor Zhang, tell us more about China's, strategy moving forward, like beyond solar and wind. What other clean energy technologies is China prioritizing right now? And how important are areas like nuclear power, hydrogen, or energy storage in China's long-term strategy?
Well, that's a really important question. Actually, all the areas you just mentioned are covered in China's 15th five-year plan. Look, given how massive this energy transition needs to be, it's pretty clear that no single technology can solve the problem by itself. What really matters is how we get existing technologies to work together in a more coordinated way. And then how new innovations, new technologies can help expand and speed up the process. So in that context, based on my conversations, both inside and outside the climate world, I want to highlight two things in particular. One is grid flexibility, and second is about climate resilience technologies or solutions. So grid flexibility cover things like energy storage, smart grids, and demand-side response. So this is crucial because renewable energy we all know, is intermittent, right? By nature, it's not always available when we need it. So China made a huge progress expanding renewable energy capacity during the last FYP, but now the next big challenge is whether the power system can actually use the capacity efficiently. So in other words, the question is no longer just how much renewable energy can we install, is how effectively can we actually use them? Otherwise, we could probably end up with a weird situation that is wasting a lot of renewable energy on one hand and facing power shortages, right, during peak demand, particularly. Now, on climate adaptation, China was actually one of the first countries to issue a national climate adaptation strategy. So, as climate challenges get more intense, adaptation has become increasingly important. So in the 15th five-year plan, is listed as a key part of the national security. It's not only about climate, but it's a key part of the national security. And here's what I really want to emphasize in response to your question. So when we talk about climate adaptation, it's not just about early warning systems or emergency response. We also need to build that into the planning and development of clean energy infrastructure. For example, our energy systems, they also need to be able to withstand extreme weather events and keep delivering stable power under those extreme conditions.
So, Arvea, what does the picture look like in Europe? Like, which clean energy technologies are likely to play the biggest role in the coming years?
Well, first of all, the grid infrastructure, the distributed potential, the investments are absolutely on the table with the grid package that was announced during last year by the Commission, because everything that Zhang Jian was saying applies to the transition of energy and electricity systems across the board. We obviously have to work together on all that is the utilization of digital applications to demand a response. There are virtual twins that are extremely powerful. We have to create a shared standard for accounting of impacts and real sustainability parameters also for digital solutions, applications, and obviously artificial intelligence for understanding what the trade-offs are and where we need to use those things. For instance, I agree with Zhang Jian that, and I think under the 15th five-year plan, I'm saying that artificial intelligence is very important for also the Chinese government, but they are starting focusing on the real end use cases applications, not on the, let's put it simply, the gamification, but really what we need these powerful means to be applied for, what is the benefit at the end. So industrial internet is a very important element, and it has a huge potential for efficiency, not only energy efficiency. We're starting, I agree, Chinese operators as much as our operators, my own company as well, see efficiency from around 35% reduction in GHG up to 55%. And this also accounts for other resources. So all these things are there. Obviously, there is a potential for joint work with China in the field of hydrogen. Green hydrogen has a limited application, especially for developing of long-term storage. That's a very important component. We see the electrification of heavy vehicles moving forward very fast in China. Electric trucks are being sold up to 25%, even a bit more on the Chinese market, whilst in Europe, we are still in the European Union at a lower level. We have to think of materials development for conversion of heat into electricity. We have to think about the reduction of the footprint of land use and natural resources, bioeconomy. We have to reduce the footprint physically of our agriculture. This is a lot of new technologies that we will see, like conversion of new molecules for food production, soilless food production, or even all the applications for reduction of other components such as the fertilizers or water. And adaptation is all that, because adaptation is nature. So creating an economy that is able to work better with nature is probably one of the things, and it's not only technology that we can do.
Yes. So, Professor Zhang, how do you view the potential for cooperation with EU in all these emerging clean energy fields?
I really do think there are big opportunities, right, for us to collaborate. There are quite a few areas but I think the one I'd really like to highlight is cooperation on hard-to-abate sectors. These are industries like steel, chemicals, and aviation, including maritime shipping. So all of these are some of the toughest areas to decarbonize. They need a mix of advanced technology, big investment, and well-coordinated policy frameworks and standards, right? So, and of course, beyond these sectors, there are also important opportunities in things like grid flexibility technologies, energy storage, and carbon capture. So these are really system critical technologies, and they make it possible to integrate renewable energy at a large scale.
Yes, thank you, Professor Zhang Jian, Vice Dean of the Institute of Climate Change and Sustainable Development at Tsinghua University. And thank you, Arvea Marieni, Senior Advisor to the World Green Design Organization and European Climate Pact Ambassador. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And that wraps up this edition of Climate Watch. You can find more episodes on your favorite podcast platforms. Just search for Climate Watch and hit subscribe. Don't forget to leave us a quick review or share it with a friend. You can also email us at radio@cgtn.com with your questions or feedback. And stay updated on the latest climate stories with our Substack newsletter, Climate Choices. I'm Zhao Ying. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time.